Hello, welcome to Talk HR UK from me, Simon Geere, here at Alexander Lloyd, the HR recruitment people for the South East, based in sunny Sussex. I say that, it is of course raining, but nonetheless we shall press on. This is Season 2, Episode 14 of Talk HR UK, and I was fortunate to gain some time in the diary in March 2023 with James Gordanifar, who is the Global Head of Talent Acquisition for Early Careers at WTW. I had a really fascinating chat about how early careers and graduate recruitment has changed significantly post-pandemic. So we discuss the challenges and obstacles that COVID brought, the tools that are now being used in early years recruitment, and how potential candidates, applicants and students have responded to some of these new methods, what's gone well, what hasn't. I hope you really enjoy listening to this episode, and of course I look forward to talking to you all at the end. Many thanks. Good morning, James. Lovely to see you, and thanks a lot for giving up your time today to talk to me here. We've decided to talk about your specialist area as such, which is talent acquisition specifically for early careers. And my understanding is you manage this globally at Willis Towers Watson. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined WTW last year around May time, and my responsibilities for all of the early careers hiring across the globe, which accounts for around, I think in totality, just shy of 1,500 people.
Right. Wow. So a big responsibility.
Yeah, just you could say that.
And before we dive into the questions, I suppose it's something one of the reasons I particularly wanted to touch on this subject is, from our perspective externally, we've seen so many businesses seem to be investing a lot more in their talent acquisition teams and strategy for early careers. We've seen headcounts increase. We've seen some really interesting interventions, and it'd be interesting to see if you think that marries up with your experiences at Willis Towers Watson and where this interesting part of HR and talent acquisition is going, from a forward basis. But I suppose I wanted to start with pre-pandemic, if you can cast your mind back. Early careers, how did it work? How did you traditionally go around finding and attracting talent to the organization? Which methods were most effective?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, pre-pandemic, the landscape was starting to shift anyway, but I think the pandemic significantly accelerated that beyond kind of our wildest imagination. That there were still remnants of the traditional milk round, if you will, in the UK, as we call it, where you'd have the majority of your attraction activity happening in that kind of autumn period. A lot of that would be in person, organisations going out to different campuses and universities and so on, or schools, whether it be apprenticeship, to really kind of have presence in a physical setting, with those institutions. There was a lot of work starting to expand into working with different societies, for example, within universities, and there was more of a shift towards skills sessions. So there was a definite appetite from students to receive coaching and support on upskilling, which I think is quite important anyway in terms of the part you play, particularly around diversity and social mobility and setting students up for success. Really, it's not just about bums on seats, as I call it, but actually playing a contributing role into the market. So a lot of that kind of in-person piece, it kind of felt and looked like that. I mean, if you were a large enough organization as well, you'd probably be involved in helping shape certain courses and curriculum within different courses as well. And, campus brand ambassadors has been a thing for a long time, which certainly large organizations tend to leverage. They could have up to 20 people at different universities, for example, that are enlisted for the year and almost work on behalf of the organization as an ambassador for that organization. Right. So that was definitely a thing. But what was starting to happen pre-pandemic is third parties that were specialists within a certain strand of diversity, for example, were becoming, quite effective at helping amplify the message in the market. So that was definitely becoming a kind of something you would tend to get involved in as the diversity piece gathered momentum too.
Of course.
I would say social media as well, was absolutely, prevalent within this space, not to the degree it currently is, but, in organizations certainly starting to focus a lot more on their digital channels, with social media being a really key part of that. And obviously, most of what I spoke about there is obviously within attraction. But then, there were components of the recruitment process that were absolutely in person, assessment centers, interviews, and so on. I mean, to my knowledge, the vast majority of those were in person pre-pandemic.
Okay. So then obviously it happened. Everything changed forever, and certain methods were clearly no longer available to you, particularly the face-to-face work. So, yeah, what challenges and obstacles did COVID put in your way, and what did you do?
Yeah, so I mean, if I'm honest with you, before I talk about the attraction piece, which is the first part of the process, I mean, the biggest obstacle when it happened, so when it did happen, it was around this time, wasn't it? 3 years ago, so about March.
Yeah, correct,
So a lot of organisations, you'd done a lot of your attraction activity, you'd actually broken the back of that, and where you were at was in high or peak operational delivery of recruitment processes. So, all I had at the time and the world that I operated in, we were reviewing hundreds of candidates a week at assessment centres in person.
Wow.
So, the first challenge that we faced was, how do you take essentially an assessment event with 80 candidates? How do you turn that almost overnight into something that you deliver virtually? Right, we have no choice but to do this in a virtual setting. So how do you make that happen? So of course you start looking at the tools you have at your disposal. Microsoft Teams was like a pretty new thing at that point. That was the platform we chose to go with because the organization was leveraging it. We had no idea about things like breakout rooms or the different apps or surveys to kind of engage an audience that you can plug into it at that point. So we really had to trial and error. We had to test on our side, almost kind of a test environment for an assessment center, and just pull the plaster off and go with it, And we shifted everything to virtual within the space of a couple of weeks, and it was really tough, obviously. But it was a great example of innovation as well. What can you do when you're presented with a problem? So that was really interesting. And the next piece where our mind went to, again, it was away from the attraction space at that point. It was more into, then we knew we had interns coming in the summer. So, typically a 6-week program, we saw a lot of our competitors pull the program because they didn't think they could deliver a meaningful experience in a hybrid or a virtual setting. A lot of it was at the time 6 to 8 weeks. A lot of it's learnt by osmosis. These people won't necessarily have any exposure to the corporate world. So how do you do that virtually? And bearing in mind now, we take for granted that we work like this and we're on a Zoom call or whatever it might be. That was completely alien, and we decided to go with it. We thought, well, we don't know how long this is going to be around. We've given these people commitment to 6 weeks worth of work where we're paying them. If we pull that, then, what are they going to have? So we decided to condense the experience. We didn't do a full 6 weeks, but we condensed the experience. So we thought, how can we replicate as much of this in a virtual way? And the team got a lot more involved in help the business support them, put more infrastructure in place, top and tail it with sessions and skill sessions and things like that. So we kind of compensated, but we still wanted them to have that kind of work experience, which, we supported the business to deliver. And then obviously going into the next kind of season, we still had some attraction activity, don't get me wrong. Going into the next campaign, I think what happened there was a real switch to and a revelation that actually we could get so much more critical mass in a virtual setting than we ever could by being in person at one university or one career fair or whatever it might be. And so that was a real change in approach, that actually you could run an event and you could be engaging with 20, 30, 40 universities at the same time instead of just the one or whatever it might be. And there was a lot of trial and error in that, but we realized, I think the big learning there was we needed a hook. With any event, you needed a compelling reason for somebody to attend, especially if they were going to do it virtually. So we spent a lot of time pivoting the narrative much more to ESG and to diversity and to culture. And that seemed to work quite well for us.
Excellent.
So those are some of the things that spring to mind.
Oh, that's interesting. But I think, as you say, once you're running these events, I guess, as you say, from a diversity perspective, it changes geographically. You can just cover the nation or the globe at one point. It's quite mind blowing to look back at it. I bet for you now, if you think what you actually managed to achieve in quite a short time.
Yeah, definitely. And bearing in mind over this time frame, I've worked for three different organizations, you know, and one of the biggest things here is that actually there's been a real shift. The power of your brand, your employer brand, is absolutely critical, particularly in a virtual setting. Because if you're vying for the attention of literally hundreds of thousands of candidates, you're one of hundreds and you're not necessarily in person and top of mind, or you've got banners or giveaways and all this, you know, that's around the you know, students thinking, you know, how do you cut through the traffic and the noise? And I think the power of your brand has become so important in this space now.
Definitely.
I mean, it was anyway, but even more so.
And that's across the entire talent acquisition piece, whether it's early careers or experienced hires, isn't it? We're seeing so much investment and I guess utilization of the brand as those candidate attraction strategies and retention, obviously. So sticking with that, I mean, so you're now obviously, well, you're probably through it now, but in terms of your ongoing early careers candidate attraction piece, what tools are you now using, or are you using more that you weren't before? Do you know what I mean? How has it changed in the modern world post-pandemic?
Yeah, I think I'll stick with the kind of brand piece. You know, we're on a journey at WTW. You know, we rebranded, didn't we, from Willis Towers Watson to WTW, and obviously in the more experienced hire market and with our clients, that's less of a challenge because it's a well-known organization, all the rest of it.
Sure.
But Willis Towers Watson already, you know, we weren't the most prominent employer in the student market. Then to change to WTW, you know, there is no brand recognition for what that means in the student market. You know, we're literally starting from scratch. And even if we said, oh, we used to be Willis Towers Watson or Towers Watson or whatever, you know, why somebody who's going to have been coming through from 15, 16, 17 to university now, then they're not going to remember Willis Towers Watson. They're going to have no idea unless their parents work for us or something like that.
Sure.
So, you know, we have a real, like, well, I say a challenge, but it's a massive opportunity as well for us, because actually, how do we bring that story to life? And I think storytelling, cutting through the noise, having something compelling and a really clear campaign narrative is critical. And we are starting our journey around this to take that to a new level. And what I mean by that is, you know, where a lot of the HR or talent market has shifted into employee experience, colleague experience, as we call it at WTW. And actually that goes right back to your employer brand, because you want that front and center. You want that to be authentic and meaningful, but critically, you need that to be authentic and reflective of what actually happens when they join. So if you've got a disparity between the two, that's a fundamental problem for retention and diversity and all of the things that are important to us as an organization. So having that through line and that throughput and being able to be really authentic in that brand tone of voice, that message, and be compelling is really key. And where that really kind of takes its shape in early careers now is through authentic storytelling and giving your incumbents who are doing a apprenticeship or a graduate program a voice and the opportunity to speak to that audience, you know, in a meaningful way, and without filters, without the corporate, you know, kind of sense that you get off a website and all the rest of it. They don't want gloss, they don't want finish and polish. They want to know, you know, warts and all, what is it like to work in the organization? The only way to do that is give people, you know, the opportunity to be open and honest about that and a platform to do it. So I think that's why the brand piece is so important, but then so too that links the social media element. So we're in uncharted territory now. You know, we've got channels like, you know, the more of Gen Z will engage with YouTube and TikTok to search for outcomes to a general question than they will on Google. So my generation, I'll go straight to Google. Like, you know, I'm not going to, you know, I might go to YouTube sometimes for certain things, but these guys, that's their first port of call. So unless you're playing in that space, like, you're already disadvantaged. So if our mind goes purely to, you know, SEO and pay-per-click, that's just one element of what we do, and actually it's no longer necessarily the most prominent. So playing in this kind of social media space is uncharted territory, and you know, trying new things but feeling comfortable being uncomfortable is really important for organizations, because there's a piece around how much can you control, particularly if you get into advocacy models and organic kind of activity around your brand. So
Right.
I think that's a really interesting space that we're now in. The influencer marketing piece links to that. So, there are organizations now, leveraging influencers as part of their attraction strategy. And, that is, again, really kind of cutting edge and a new space for us to be in. But that's how people now engage with content. So that's something we're currently exploring as well. I think there's a place now to challenge the traditional university or schools tiering models as well.
Okay.
So a shift away from your traditional universities or schools, because if you really are trying to challenge the status quo, look for more diverse talent, look at promoting social mobility. There's a need to be much smarter in how you tier. That's not to say that some of the most prominent universities won't feature in how you tier, but it's being much more data led in how and where you spend your time and your energy.
Right.
I think you mentioned at the start about organizations investing in early careers and their talent with the best intention in the world. An early careers team is not going to be able to get coverage at every university or school across the country. Post pandemic now, you've got an opportunity because of the virtual piece to get, more presence, and third parties really help you with that, who are tapped into all of those institutions. And that's where I think there's real value if you can get return on investment from working with those third parties. But your coverage is never going to be across hundreds of schools and universities. So the challenge is really about where to spend your time and your energy to get the most amount of impact.
The best
And
reward.
and the only way to do that is through measurement. The only way to know is through having a really effective MI and data and regression analysis, and having that data-led approach to be able to keep, once you've found, okay, what's creating results, you do more of that. Or otherwise you spend your time as a busy fool. So, I think I'm a big believer in kind of that approach.
That makes perfect sense. It's alarming to hear the TikTok piece when you say that, as someone who considers themselves reasonably tech savvy, but it's something we haven't explored as a business, and there's no reason we shouldn't be, and clearly, it is something we're hearing more and more. But it goes to show. So the online piece is now where you set your stall out, you engage with your future employees, hopefully, and you have that opportunity to try and, as you say, tell stories and communicate your culture, your brand, and why WTW is as great a place to work as anywhere else, particularly the more established brands who are perhaps more well known, a retailer that everyone's familiar with. So what's the response been? How have your students responded to these new methods? What's gone well? What would you change next time, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely started to see more traction around social media and more engagement around that, because we're playing in that space and we've not really done it before. And there's an argument to say we need to do more and we need to go further and perhaps be bolder. But, the company also has to feel comfortable with that. So we're navigating that landscape ourselves at the moment. We've definitely seen third parties play a really important role for us. And that's my, reference to return on investment, because obviously that comes with a cost. But, if you take, a particular demographic, for example, within the diversity landscape, let's say it's, I don't know, students from an ethnic minority, with the best will in the world, WTW, we want to be seen as an inclusive employer, and we absolutely are. But there are third parties who are specialists in this area that can amplify your message and have relationships in a way that we could never do that unless we spent all year thinking about that and investing in it and growing a team to do that one thing. So there is a place for third parties, absolutely, but it's about how does that complement your strategy? Will you get return on investment? Does it meet your priorities? So navigating that, because there's been an explosion in suppliers, not just around the attraction place, but in terms of assessment, selection, brand, you name it, so you've got to be so hot on how do you evaluate those suppliers to have the best partnerships that are right for your business. So I think that's been a really key change, I think, post pandemic. There's a lot more opportunity as well around direct sourcing, I feel.
Right.
So perhaps borrowing some of the experience hire techniques, more and more students are actually on LinkedIn, for example,
Yes,
and
of course.
playing in that space. So, again, you've got to be actively pursuing those individuals and building relationships through that
Mm.
medium. But also there are a plethora of channels that are emerging where, candidates sign up as part of their course. And employers have the opportunity to engage with them directly through these platforms.
Yeah.
And again, that forms a really important part of your attraction strategy, and you're able to reach out directly and encourage them to attend events or even apply directly as well through those channels.
Right.
But the other piece I think many organisations are seeing as a challenge, is the increase in renegades on offers. So
Right.
there's a real. I remember when I started in early careers, which is probably, I've got a mixed background between experience hire and early careers.
Uh-huh.
And I remember even when I started, which was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a sense that you had to be first to make the offer. The
Right.
first
Okay.
person to make the offer, the student tended to commit, they tended to hold that offer, and they tended to commit to your organization because there
Mm.
were unspoken rules in the past, or even in some countries, there are spoken rules that you
Yeah.
have to accept the first offer.
Okay.
Um, and there was this undertone that if you made the first offer, that a candidate was yours and they were going to stick with you.
Right.
What we've seen really change and accelerate through the pandemic is candidates are holding on to multiple offers, going through multiple processes,
Mm.
receiving 4 or 5 if they're lucky, and then they're picking the one that obviously works best for them,
Yeah.
and they're playing with the system. As an argument, say, why not?
Exactly.
At the
Mm.
start of your career, but then as an organisation, presents you with risk.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing is candidates, a spike in reneges. We've done a lot on the what we call keep warm engagement strategy.
Right.
Once they receive an offer, really trying to bolster that relationship, look after them, keep in touch with them, give them access to resources, build a
Okay.
relationship to try and minimize that. And it's worked well for us. But we're seeing lots reported back in the market about that change in candidate behavior. So those are some of the things that spring to mind.
Mm. That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it does make perfect sense, and in the modern modern world and the current market, it's no different to experienced hires. We're back
Mm,
to a point now, a bit like when I started in recruitment, where most candidates would have 2, 3, 4 options on the table at any one time, which is and that went away for a long time. But as you say, I guess the way that you do it now gives everyone a fair shot, and it's perhaps how you continue to engage post offer at all levels again that is making that key difference. But
yeah.
yeah, very interesting. So obviously, for many, certainly in the UK, there is, and across quite a lot of Europe, if not globally, a lot more things are returning to normality in terms of the ability to have face-to-face contact with limited
Hmm.
restrictions. Are you seeing any pressure to resume face-to-face recruitment activity? Does it feel like, well, now that we can do that again, that was always the best way? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think virtual fatigue is 100% a thing, whether it's in work for people like us or it's students. And yeah, they
Uh-huh.
are absolutely demanding in-person activity. And the people that are doing that really well are standing out because a
Right.
lot of people have realized it's more efficient or it's more cost effective to do more things virtually. So if
Hmm.
you're making the effort to be present on campus and you're doing cool stuff, which I've seen a lot of companies you really pivot towards that this year,
Right.
you're going to stand out and you're going to build more meaningful relationships. It's as simple as that. But I think it's about hybrid. It's
Right.
about and true hybrid. It's about having deliberate interaction and meaningful, presence with students at physical events where that's going to make an impact with your target audience or whatever it might be. And there is absolutely a place for virtual still, particularly when amplifying the message to students you just never would be able to engage otherwise.
Right.
So I think that's why you've got to have a really a multi-channel approach and a really
Yeah.
good approach, kind of considered and strategic approach to your attraction activity. And yes, the demand is absolutely there from students, particularly around upskilling,
Okay.
and to have in-person skills sessions, I would say.
And that obviously then provokes the challenge with the mentors and the coaches internally, because you need them together. don't you, once they join the organization? And that's, I certainly, when I'm talking to HR directors, they're saying there is a degree of, let's get back to the office for collaboration, for productivity, for mental health reasons, but also, as you say, it's this early careers population that need an opportunity to learn organically as well as theoretically.
Completely. I mean, some of the feedback that we see from our incumbents is they really do want that kind of relationship, whether it's with a cohort and their peers, but also, in person with buddies, mentors, as you mentioned. And I think the other aspect as well, and, I don't know whether, it's not necessarily what you lead with in a commercial setting, but it's the social aspect of what we used to get from work, right? And I suppose if you're coming in at a younger age, part of that is, what you get from work. Of course, people want flexibility. And they demand that now in their lives and through the world of work. But it doesn't mean that they still don't want social cohesion and a sense of belonging. And a lot of that is driven by in-person activity. I think we know that innately, and there's data to back that up. But yeah, we certainly see that come through in terms of feedback. Absolutely.
Interesting. It's good to hear that it's actually being led by the students, I suppose, and the employees rather than the organizations. So that's sort of comforting that it is something that they want, that they feel will help their development, which is great. So so moving forward, last question for you. And I always like to finish off these conversations with this kind of, what do you think's coming next? What sort of changes, improvements do you think? How will early careers continue to change for organizations like WTW?
Well, I think, I've alluded to this throughout, but I think early careers has become unbelievably and increasingly complex over certainly the past 5 years. The pandemic has accelerated that and accentuated it. And I think, diversity is a massive undertone, as well as the nature of hybrid attraction and hybrid recruitment, and then the hybrid lived experience. So, early careers being asked to be way more strategic, and you're almost operating like you're running a small business when you run an early careers function, particularly if it's at scale. All the techniques that we've spoken about, the importance of employer brand, multi-channel marketing, really be able to work with data and iterate your approach to deliver the best outcomes. This was language we weren't really using 5-10 years ago in early careers. It was much more about the relationships you had with those core 25 universities or whatever, going to your milk round, making a big splash, taking them through a pretty rudimentary process.
Transactional piece, wasn't it, to a degree?
Yeah. So we've gone to a whole new place. Like the one of the big things on the horizon is strategic workforce planning, through the lens of skills of the future. So I think it's by the mid 2030s, PwC say 30% of jobs will be automated. What does that mean for each industry? What does that mean for WTW? That conversation, I'm driving now internally and going to be brought into, because actually I've got to work with the business to understand, okay, well, what we build now is essentially what's going to be in place for the organization in that kind of time frame. So are we pivoting in that direction and recruiting the right skills and building those skills? So being so much more strategic in so many facets is a really big part of where early careers is going, and the demand that's being placed on on you. Conversely to that, you're building all these skills, but Gen Z don't want to stay with an organization for 10, 15, 20 years, like
very true.
The people in leadership roles. So having that open, honest conversation with the business to build capability and programs at this level that are accepting of that notion. So what does that mean? Are you going to build programs where people stay for 10, 15 years? Some might, it's not a general broad brush approach, but probably a lot more aren't than what happened when our leaders came in. So how do you navigate that? And how do you accept that you're contributing to a much bigger ecosystem? And actually what you build and those skills, you have to hope that employer X, Y, and Z, and competitor X, Y, and Z are doing the same thing, because then what happens in the ecosystem is that you're contributing to that and benefit from it in 5, 10 years time,
Exactly.
potentially even longer, when they come back as an experienced hire and a boomerang hire, which is increasing
Yeah.
as well. We know that's a thing, right? The pandemic and the Great Resignation is showing us that boomerang hires is a real thing, and is probably going to be part of the talent ecosystem that we need to plan for. So as somebody leaves, I'm going into experience hire, right? But as somebody leaves, it's not about, ostracizing them for leaving the organization. It's
No.
about continuing that
Yeah.
relationship. So I think that longer term talent kind of strategic thinking, the whole thing is intertwined, and early careers is the starting point of that. And so it's a really, it's a really different conversation now that we're having to have. So that's a really important part. We talked a lot about upskilling. I think that's going to still continue to be a really important part of what early careers do in the attraction landscape, because I think we have to play our part in helping to contribute to lost learning, lost confidence from the impact of the pandemic on this generation. And that's going to last. But I mean, I've got a 9-year-old boy, and we've seen it in him. How long does that last? None of us know this. We could be seeing generations come through that have been impacted, and they haven't had the opportunity to have work experience. It doesn't look the same anymore. There's a lost confidence. There's a lost interpersonal skills. So the role you play as an employer, not expecting the finished article and looking for potential and how you build that, is just going to become more pronounced, I think. And the continuation of kind of more direct sourcing techniques and so on and so forth. But I could talk all day about this, to be honest with you, as you can tell. But
well, I know it's clear your passion really comes across, and it's funny. Again, at the end of all of these conversations, we always sort of end up sitting here, sort of chin stroking, saying, "How did HR get so big?" Do you know what I mean? There's just so much across all areas now, be it talent acquisition, early careers, reward. It's in the last 2 to 3 years, the impact on our industry and what we now have to do, particularly what you're talking about there, is acknowledging you're doing your best to do a great job of bringing these people in, giving them a great experience, knowing they're probably going to go, and making sure you position yourselves throughout their entire life to bring them back. I mean, that's
exactly.
We'd have laughed about that 10 years ago, I'm sure. As an idea. So it's amazing. No, it's great to connect and hear some of these brilliant ideas and hear how the experience has changed for both you as someone that looks after this process, and obviously the people that are joining the business. But thanks so much, James. I really appreciate your time. It's been great to talk to you about this, and good luck with the ongoing process.
Thanks, Simon.
Good. Thanks a lot, James. Thank you for watching and or listening to Season 2, Episode 14 of Talk HR UK. Particularly thank you to James Gordanifar from WTW for his insights into the future of early careers recruitment. All the other episodes are available on the Alexander Lloyd YouTube channel, or for audio only podcasts on Apple, on Spotify. I will, of course, publicise both video and audio of this on LinkedIn, so hopefully you can find it easily. Please do like and subscribe for all future Talk HR UK podcasts. I am, of course, Simon Geere. I work at Alexander Lloyd, specialising in HR recruitment, and I look forward to seeing you next time for our next podcast. Thank you.